Hello and welcome to another edition of Buckeye Banter. We are telling the stories of Ohio State football, basketball players, people who worked around the athletics at Ohio State. And today I'm so pleased and blessed to bring in Bob Hoying. Bob, thanks for the time.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks for
Hey,
having me.
yeah, we're telling your story. And of course, a lot of folks out there know you as Bobby Hoying. I assume when you got more in the professional world, you wanted to go with Bob.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of 50-50 when I was at Ohio State. It was funny because in St. Henry's, I was Bob most of my life, and then I got to
Okay.
Ohio State, I was Bobby. And then and I'm trying to go back to Bobby this year, 2025. So I had to, maybe a little down health wise. I tore my labrum in my shoulder last year, so I'm trying to get back to Bobby if I can in 2025.
There you go. There you go. Well, you grew up in St. Henry, as you mentioned. You were born September 20th, 1972. I was actually going to share with you a little bit. When I went, when you were at Ohio State, I was a little younger, and I was in high school. And my knowledge of St. Henry, Ohio, was Wally Post, I believe your grandfather,
Yep.
and famous Cincinnati Red with Frank Robinson and Veda Pinson and all those guys and Gus Bell. And then you yourself, and I didn't really know Jim Lachey yet at that time or who he was because I was kind of in between age wise. I moved into Park Hall at Ohio State in the fall of '97, and I've got Todd Kaiser and Aaron Post in my room and next door. Uh,
Wow.
St. Henry guys obviously know you. Um, the amazing thing about that, I remember they only had like 58 or so kids in their graduating class, but like 7 or 8 of them came down to Ohio State. And man, they were just so close. Even throughout college, as we met more people, that group hung together. Talk to me a little bit about St. Henry and how close you are to folks even there probably today.
Yeah, I think I look back and so feel so lucky that I grew up in a place like St. Henry because I had great parents. My grandfather played for the Reds. I didn't know it really. I was the
Mhm.
oldest grandchild on the Post side. My mom is the oldest daughter, Wally's daughter. So yeah, I kind of grew up in a small town with this sort of mythical grandfather,
Mhm.
and he passed away when I was in second grade. So I just still have I do have memories of him, but not a ton. Um, but such a great place to grow up. The same guys that we went on to win some state titles with were the same guys I went to kindergarten with. There wasn't really any move-ins, move-outs. We all apologize for my phone.
That's all right.
Um, we all we all grew up together. And, my point guard, Scott Brunswick, was, one of my best friends in kindergarten. And he goes on, to be an all MAC wide receiver at Toledo. Jeff Hardings grew
Mm,
up less
yeah.
than a mile away from me, was a two-time All-American at Penn State. Kevin Niekamp, a really good friend. Um, Ended up going to Ohio State on full scholarship. So we just had a really good couple classes there, and really over the next couple decades, um, St. Henry had produced a number of great athletes that have gone on into college to play. So um, it's just one of those places, not a lot to do, so the nearest fast food restaurant was 20 minutes away, one stoplight in our town. Everybody's Catholic, everybody knew each other. A lot of hardworking, farming folks. My dad was one of 15 kids, grew up on a farm, and it's where I worked growing up. And so I think we were all kind of exposed to this hard work ethic, uh, togetherness, teamwork, unselfishness, are all traits that we all kind of grew up with.
Yeah, I remember Jeff Harding's brother Joe was in the class that I would have been in, and the guys talked about him, and even they had wished he had come down to Ohio State, but that Penn State tie with Coach Joe Pa was a little too serious for them.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about if I have it right. You won a football state title and then two basketball state titles. Is that right?
Yeah, we were able to win. My junior year in basketball was really our first title, and as a group, and almost all of us played both sports. Played multiple sports. A lot of us played three sports. So, um, but we went on a run there, and I think our volleyball team won a state title our senior year. So there was a lot of state titles, over that 24-month period.
Yeah.
just incredible experience for us. I think as a basketball kid growing up, probably was my first love. I loved hoops. To be able to play in St. John's Arena was incredible experience. You know, 12, 13,000 people. We sold it out even as a Division 3 and 4 teams back then. So it was special for me because my dad had taken me to the state basketball tournament as a little kid. So to be able to go back there as a junior and senior and win in St. John's Arena was pretty awesome, pretty special moments. And we were able to win in Massillon my senior year. Um, to a Sandusky St. Mary's team. We were actually down 17-0 going into the final quarter,
Wow.
and we came back and won. We scored 20 points in the fourth quarter, which was pretty incredible sort of experience in how we won our first state title for St. Henry. So great memories, man. Those are some of the best. And I tell kids all the time, whether I'm talking to Ohio State or anybody else, some of those moments in your high school or even in college, are the best, even compared to anything you had in the NFL.
Now, obviously, you came to Ohio State to play quarterback. That's a big deal. How seriously did you take some of the college interests you had for basketball?
Not very. I think through my junior year, after my junior year football season, became clear I was either going to play at a pretty high level of football or not so high of basketball, and so I think became pretty clear after that season is really when I started really focusing on football. And today, I mean, you see kids that commit,
Mm.
freshman, sophomore year, which is crazy. I wasn't committed to Ohio State until midway through my senior year basketball season.
Wow, that's what I was going to
Yeah.
ask you next about recruiting and who was recruiting you, and then so I guess talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get into the fact that you were from a smaller division school and how what that what that meant to you. But what about recruiting? Who came to get you, and how'd you make the decision?
I think what helped me is I went to Ohio State's football camp as a junior. So I think from what I remember, I think, I was able to get exposed to their coaching staff then going into my senior year. So I think they had an eye on me. And then I was able to win the Mr. Football Award that year. And I think that was sort of the momentum. And certainly I wasn't in a spot to go wherever I wanted to go, but there were a lot of schools that were going to offer, a scholarship. And it came down to Illinois, who was throwing the ball a ton with Jeff George. I had just graduated a year or two before. Um, John Makovic was there. UCLA was the next one, and Louisville had Howard Schnellenberger that was down there from via Miami. They were throwing the ball around a ton, so it really came down to those four schools. But to my high school coach's credit, who did not allow us to miss basketball games or even practices to take official visits, I
Uh-huh.
went on one. I went to Ohio State's because we were on a sort of another state title run my senior year, and I didn't want to miss any basketball, so I visited Ohio State and then committed. So it was just one and done for me.
That's a smart move out of him to keep you locked up in the state of Ohio.
I didn't want to miss any. I didn't want to miss any basketball games, so
Coach
that's kind of
Cooper
why I did it.
owes him something.
Yeah.
Well, what about moving from a smaller division and going up? I don't know if it's a bigger deal nowadays. Even Tavian St. Clair played in Division Three. I know Watterson actually here from Columbus beat him last year when he was a junior. What do you think the transition can be like for a quarterback, especially as you had to make it? You did redshirt in '91, but what about that going from the small town, the small school to the big city?
It was a bigger I say to people a lot that it was a bigger adjustment for me going from St. Henry to Ohio State, then Ohio State to the NFL.
Mm.
I think I was fortunate that I was able to redshirt. That redshirt year I played with a guy named Eddie George, Terry Glenn, um, even Ricky Dudley, didn't play right away. And so we all were on the scout team together, and we sort of figured out the speed of the game together, and we were able to run scout. And I think that sort of period of time was enough time for me to make that adjustment. And you make it pretty fast. It's still competition, just everything happens faster and quicker. Guys are stronger. You have less time to make decisions. But so that I was fortunate that I didn't have to play right away. and was able to watch Kirk Herbstreit was the starter that year, and watch guys in front of me.
And today, obviously, a lot of the times they come into school around January. You wouldn't have been able to play your senior year of basketball had you decided to do that back then, but it wasn't happening. And I know, obviously, a guy like St. Clair, he's been down to the Woody so many times. So I guess maybe the transition be a little easier if you had that. But you came in and you did redshirt. You played behind Herbstreit. You did play some in '92. What was that like to kind of get your feet wet?
I remember peeing down my leg. Really, I went in. I think it was against Bowling Green, maybe, and I actually had to make a check. And I just remember not being real sure of the offense yet, and so thankfully I didn't have to play a lot that year. But it's a great experience. I mean, I think any kid from Ohio. I mean, I grew up. I didn't have um, really any aspirations of playing in the NFL. It was
Mhm.
always to be the quarterback at Ohio State. I mean, that was it for me. That's what I dreamed about being. Um, so when I had that moment, it was pretty special. And then really anything, the NFL was kind of all gravy for me. I mean, I got into a spot where, we were successful, my last 3 seasons, and was able to continue to improve. But I'm telling you, when I was at St. Henry, the only thing I wanted to do was be the Ohio State quarterback.
Well, yeah, that's amazing, and certainly you do have dreams come true. Now, in '93, you did split times a little bit with a transfer named Brett Powers. Um, I talked to in the first episode with Greg Belisari a little bit about '93 and how that year kind of, to a lot of us, especially of a certain age, that kind of put Ohio State football back on the map a little bit. I don't know if you agree with that at all, but if you could describe the prospect of kind of battling for your position. I believe you started every game, but Brett got in and played quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it was a situation where I think if I would have played better as a sophomore, I could have probably earned the spot, and been the full time starter. But I think it probably went like it should have. I've not watched that game film in quite some time, but that's how I remember it. And so I think it was a great learning experience. I can tell you, no quarterbacks like a two quarterback system. It's not
Mhm.
fun, but it was what I had to deal with and sort of battle through. So I think the competition that it brought out in both of us was great for me, long term. Um, but you mentioned it. I think I look back at my senior year and maybe the last 2 years of our time, 94 and 95, is sort of especially on the offensive side of the ball, of really changing the perception of Ohio State football.
Right.
And I don't take all the credit at all. I mean, we just had incredible skill guys that I was able to play with. And we went really from run first offense to balance. And you know, we set a lot of passing records those years while Eddie George won the Heisman,
Mhm.
running the football. So that's how balanced we were. And looking back, I think before those years, Ohio State was sort of three yards in a cloud of dust sort of mentality, and I think after that, that dynamic shifted a little bit where we started producing big time wide receivers year after year after year, and running backs and skill guys, and we were more balanced on offense. So that's something I look back at really proud of those years.
Well, and to your point, I think in '94 you set the program record for touchdown passes of the season with only 19, and then the next
Right.
year you break it with 29. So
Right.
yeah, I think you're spot on there. But I was looking back at some of the games, and I saw the Washington game in '93 was definitely a kind of a highlight point for you and the team, and I was just laughing at myself a little bit because I'm like, well, of course you're going to do pretty well. Like you've got Joey Galloway, Chris Sanders, Terry Glenn at that point's returning kicks, but he became obviously a great receiver for you. And in the running back room, Eddie George, Raymond Harris, Butler Benote. I know Smith was there. Robert Smith was there earlier. I mean, just the depth of talent that you had to work with.
It was the depth of talent, really the guy that changed it for me was Walt Harris when he came in as a quarterback coach for my senior year from the NFL. He brought in, I would say, 70 to 80% of the West Coast offense, what they were running in New York at the time, and that changed it for me. We came out that first year against Boston College, and we started throwing to Eddie George out of the backfield,
Yeah.
which has never been done before. uh, before that time, and consistently doing that. And there were just aspects of the West Coast offense that fit my skill set: make quick decisions, get the ball out, be accurate. Um, and we had success with that. And so I think that really kind of changed it for me personally, and I still text back and forth with Coach Harris a lot. He changed my life,
Mhm.
he really did. He's a huge reason why I was able to get drafted in the NFL, and just changed how we approach things on offense, and was so positive, just even that short period of time we had together. So that changed it a lot for me.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Herbstreit earlier. He was the quarterback in '92. The end of that Washington game, as people mobbed Coach Cooper, there was Kirk with his microphone. He had already
Right.
started doing the sideline reporting, so that was probably funny for you to kind of see your former teammate so quickly. He was already on the sidelines.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny how that all works. I remember conversations with Kirk back then, because he still was working out at the Woody Hayes, and he had an opportunity to take, I think, a job with Worthington Steel or Worthington Industries, and he was asking some advice of what he should do, either that or work with the radio gig that he had in town. And I and others suggested that he just does TV and radio as long as he can do it. So it's
Well,
it's
yeah, the
amazing what it's all turned into.
sliding doors moments, right? Of what could have
Right,
happened if he might be running the company, but we wouldn't have him on ESPN game day or anything like that.
right.
You know, talk a little bit about '94 because record wise, obviously it wasn't quite what you'd had in '93, and then not what you would have in '95. You did get the monkey off your backs as a collective and beat Michigan that year. Tell me a little bit about your '94 season and what you remember from that.
94 was tough. It was tough on me personally, I think, just from the standpoint, you have all these dreams about going to Ohio State and being the quarterback, and we played a really good Illinois team, and
Mhm.
they had an incredible defense. And I remember coming up short in that game, and it was tough, man. The fans were tough on us. Back then, none of us had cell phones. They weren't invented yet. But we had this thing called the answering machine,
Yeah.
and people could get your number and leave you messages. So the messages were not so kind, after some of those games. But it's how you respond to that adversity, I think, ultimately. And some of our best games were coming off of losses that year. And we were maybe a little bit inexperienced in some spots that showed up for us. And certainly in my junior year, I wasn't playing at the level I did as a senior. So
Mhm.
I think you could just, it's hard when you're that age to realize it, but
But
you
you
have
have
to
to
fight
fight
through
through
adversity
adversity
and
and
continue to get better. And that's what we did. But that was a tough year.
you triggered a memory for me. That 1994 Illinois game was my first time in the shoe.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I was a sophomore in high school, and I got to go to the game. And Simeon Rice and Kevin Hardy ruined my day as well as yours.
Yeah. They were really good. That
Yeah,
that 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 defense was really good. And that's, we always say the other side has great players too, and they train hard. And so I think you just had to dig down deep and continue to fight our way through it.
I promise you, I did not call you and leave you a message. That was not me. Uh, so I guess even as a high school kid at the time, I couldn't help but look at it, and maybe somebody on ESPN or somebody brought it up too. But if you look at that 1994 Penn State team, Kerry Collins, Kajana Carter, Kyle Brady at tight end, Bobby Ingram at receiver, and incidentally, at the time, the only time I've ever placed a wager on an Ohio State sporting event was with a classroom friend of mine back at school. I bet him you'd beat Penn State in '94, and I lost. So
Yeah,
that didn't.
that wasn't even close.
Yeah, that one was not close, and I've never placed another bet on Ohio State again. But I bring up those guys for a reason because I wonder if you felt this way. The comparison from '94 Penn State to '95 Ohio State, yourself, Eddie George, Ricky Dudley comes from the basketball team officially and is just amazing at tight end, and you had Terry Glenn win the Bolitnikoff at receiver. Did you ever kind of think in '94 going into '95 or while you're training in the offseason about that idea of, hey, they did this, let's do it again?
Maybe not directly like that, but I remember one of the first things Walt Harris said to me in the weight room after maybe a week into spring practice. is basically he said, our skill on offense is good or better than anything they had at the New York Jets the year before that.
Yeah.
And I thought he was just, blowing smoke. But he was serious. He was serious. He was dead serious. And I think that's kind of maybe when we all started believing it. We collectively as a group could do something special. And you saw it, this past year with Ohio State's team. We had a lot of seniors, we had a lot of experience, and I think that all sort of paid off in '95.
Memories of that year, certainly the Notre Dame game. First time since like 1936, Ohio State was playing Notre Dame. What do you recall, especially the quarterback on the other side was touted as the big time quarterback, but you and your teammates really got the job done.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were playing them this year, I knew they would start running game film of '95 and all the other Ohio State
Yeah.
Notre Dame games. But you look back in that game, we were kind of off that first quarter. We didn't score any points, and so ended up scoring I think 44 the rest of the way. But um, it was, I tell people, a top five moment, top five day in my life.
Oh wow.
When you beat Notre Dame, there was such hype leading up to that game. We hadn't played them since the 30s or late 20s. Um, and there's the alumni base is so large for Notre Dame and for Ohio State, and it was a beautiful, I mean, most beautiful Saturday afternoon that you could have to play football, and and it turned out awesome for us. The long pass that Terry
Mm.
ended up catching a 12-yard little hook route and taking it the distance, 80 yards was as loud as I've ever heard the stadium. Is just an incredible moment for me and the rest of the team. So um, just awesome. And then after you beat Notre Dame like that, for weeks, it's all anybody wanted to talk about. But you look back at that '95 season, and just the strength of schedule and some of the teams that we played,
Hmm.
Boston College to start, Washington, um, Notre Dame, and then I think we went right into Penn State. Pitt was another preseason or pre Big Ten game that we played. Um, so we had a really strong schedule, that year.
Yeah, Eddie George goes for 314 against Illinois. All of you kind of collectively got the monkey off your backs for the loss that you'd had the year before against them, and it's just an amazing day. Actually, going back to the Notre Dame game, my stepfather, he grew up in a Catholic household. Actually, he went to Watterson here in Columbus, and his dad was a Notre Dame fan. He was an Ohio State fan, and he wore a T-shirt to the game that said "Rudy sucks." so, very very big moment in the household there for us. But talk a little bit
What
about the Illinois game. It started snowing a little bit that day. Eddie goes for 314.
Yeah, it was terrible weather. Eddie had just a monster day, and then we ended up, I don't know if it was second, third and long down towards the goal line, and he made an awesome catch, back of the end zone, I think late in that game. And I remember saying to somebody, I'm like, I think that seals it for the Heisman. Like I feel like he had such a monster of a game, and then to have a touchdown, catching the touchdown pass was awesome for him.
So, and he'd had the fumble, I guess, freshman year in '92 against them as well. So
Yep.
certainly some redemption in a large part for him. So '95, you're 10th in the Heisman voting. Eddie goes on and wins it. Your first team All Big Ten. You back to the idea that the offense had changed. School record 475 points at the time. Again, 29 touchdown passes was a record at the time. Um, you got Penn State back. You threw for 354 against them. That was a big day for you.
Yeah, I think to go back, because the way the Big Ten season was, as they were coming into the Big Ten, we had to go back to back
Hmm.
to Happy Valley, and so to exercise the demons of the year before and actually go back there, and then we won, a game-winning drive right at the end of the game. Ricky caught one of the most iconic plays we had as a group, to convert, in that last 2-minute drive, and Eddie ultimately goes in and scores. Um, but it was an awesome run. I think we covered as a team every single game up until Michigan. And think we were second maybe in the country at the time, and it was just it was an incredible run for us.
It was. I mean, you set the school record for passing yards in a season at the time with 32.69. That was around 700 yards more than Art Schleister's 1982 record. So, again, the tribute to Walt Harris, tribute to you and all the weapons you had.
Yeah, and I think the thing that maybe gets lost in it's not just the quarterback that experiences it's the offensive line, but
Mhm.
we were still a team back then that huddled. We huddled all the
Yeah.
time. I never took a snap from shotgun. I was always under center. So teams are up tempo now. I don't know what percentage more plays we have on offense today versus 30 years ago, but it's significantly more. So I think from an efficiency standpoint, that those offenses were, um, at the tops of the list, with anything that Ohio State's ever had.
Well, and again, in '94, I was telling you I went to that Illinois game. I sat in B deck right in the north end zone. And I remember grabbing my stepdad's binoculars and looking through them. And '94, I believe you would have had Stringer and Pace, right? So,
Yep.
I mean, just incredible. Like,
Yeah.
the size of the holes they would make and those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Yeah. And looking back at those years, we had a ton of guys that decided to leave after their junior year, and came out early. And Big Daddy left after his redshirt sophomore year. Sean Springs was an early guy to the NFL. Lorenzo Styles, Craig Powell, a ton of guys, Terry Glenn, that ended up not staying for their senior year. And I always look back and like, if we could have just kept everybody together through their
Yeah.
senior year, maybe we would have won another one or two national titles for Coach Cooper. Um, but it just didn't turn out that way.
Greg Belisari was saying there a week or two ago that when he went down to Atlanta and saw the national title game, and he looked around at some of his former teammates and thought, man, if we could have had a playoff in '95 or '96 or 90, even '93, but '95 or '96, I mean, the damage you guys could have done.
Yeah, and it's funny how close this year resembled our '95 season.
Mhm.
We ended up getting beat by a touchdown my senior year up in Michigan. We still would have qualified easily for a playoff this year, if we would have had that in place. But I also say this: if we would have had NIL and transfer portal, that '95 team would have never been what it was.
Mm.
Luke Fickle, Mike Vrabel, all the guys that Ryan Miller, Greg Belisari, all the guys that we knew on defense and offense. Eddie George could have left after not playing very much his sophomore junior year. Um, and so I look back at that time and I'm like, I'm very happy that I played when I did because of the teams that we ended up sort of being together over 4 or 5 years together.
Oh, just a great time, and certainly again for me to kind of come as age as a fan. That was very fun, very exciting time to be an Ohio State fan for sure. Now you're drafted in the third round by the Eagles the following spring. Ray Rhodes was your coach. I guess take me through it. You appeared in games for 5 seasons with the Eagles and Raiders. You started 13 games over '97 and '98. You mentioned earlier in the interview here that the transition from high school to college was not as or was bigger than the transition from college to pro. But take me through that a little bit because it's got to be different, right?
Yeah, I think it's you have this year's Eagles team that ended up winning the Super Bowl. Their head coach had a saying I thought was awesome. You can't be great without the greatness of others. He said
Mhm.
that a few times after the Super Bowl game, and I thought that was just so awesome thing to say. And it really takes an entire team. And you know, uh, so thankful the experiences I had in Philadelphia and Oakland both were a little bit different, but um, you know, y- you have to be in the right place, right time. And I think certainly you have to take advantage when the opportunities are put in front of you. Philly's a hard town to play in.
Yeah.
I played a lot my second year, started the last half of that season. We almost get in the playoffs, and I'm telling you that off season was you were like a rock star. I did appearances, made a lot of money.
Mm.
Um, and then that third year, you come back, we were 3-13, and they absolutely hated me. And then I get traded out to Oakland. So I saw the very best of playing in Philadelphia and maybe the darker side or the harder side of not being a winner, in Philadelphia. So, but I love Philly. I love my time there. Met some great friends, great teammates. Um, and so thankful that, I met John Gruden was our offensive coordinator, and a big reason why I got traded out to Oakland ultimately when he took
Oh
the
yeah.
head job out there.
Yeah, and certainly that West Coast offense kind of continuing to pay dividends for you, right? You probably didn't have to change too much of what maybe verbiage changed, but you kind of knew the concepts.
Yeah, well, it's awesome. This story, Andy Reid marks my time, I guess, going to Oakland. So when Andy was the head coach, drafted Donovan McNabb, he brings me in after 3 or 4 mini camps and said, I'm going to trade you. I can get a 5th round draft pick from 2 teams, either Cincinnati or Oakland. And, Coach Reed looked me right in the eye and said, your choice. You tell me where you want to go. So I am so thankful to Coach Reed for allowing, me to do that. He was getting the same draft pick for me. And I chose Oakland because John Gruden was out there. I I fly out there, I get traded, I fly out there. We are actually playing a Monday night football game 4 days later. And I played 3 quarters of that game with basically, 53 guys or 60 guys I didn't know. The only
Sure.
guy I knew out there was Ricky Dudley. He was the tight end.
Uh-huh.
And but to your point, the offense was pretty much the same. I crammed for a couple days in the hotel room and got up to speed. Um, but yeah, so thankful that I had that experience in the West Coast offense and quickly transferred to another team.
You made the right choice, but as a Bengals fan, I would have enjoyed seeing you suit up for the Bengals, and you could have played in the city where your grandfather played. That would have been something.
Yeah, that was definitely a draw, but I think, just for me, professionally, it was a better decision.
Sure.
And we had some good teams out in Oakland as well, so it was a pretty easy one for me to make.
Well, how tough was the decision to make to move on from playing football? At what point did you kind of make that decision, and how tough was it?
Yeah, it was tough. I think, that last year in Oakland, I was up. My contract was up. I had hurt my throwing elbow, and kind of left with the decision I could maybe try to hang on, be a third string quarterback for a few more years potentially. Um, but I had started investing in real estate really at the end of my rookie year when I was playing in Philadelphia. I came home in the offseason. I trained back in Columbus, so met my partner and I started investing in some deals, back then. And so I had to make a decision. I could hang on and maybe play for a few more years, nothing guaranteed, or next chapter of your life starts. And I'm telling you, I made that decision, and for probably 2 or 3 years, you're still not in a great place.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it necessarily depressed, but it's hard to replace football. It's hard to replace those moments of having, just 53 dudes acting like they're, you know, uh, just kids growing up, in the backyard, having fun playing football. And I think for a lot of guys, it's hard to find what's next, after football's over with. So I was very lucky, though. I met a great business partner, Brent Crawford, and then every year I got more and more into the business, and eventually, you find your way. We had my wife and I lucky to have 4 kids now, and started our family. And we've called Central Ohio Columbus. I live out in Dublin for the last 25 years, home for us. So thankful that I was able to go to Philadelphia, experience the East Coast, out in Oakland, and
Mhm.
experience the West Coast living, and then realize how good it is back in Ohio. Um, and we've loved living here ever since.
You've made your mark. Crawford Hoying is the company that you work for, that you co-own, and real estate development, management, construction. I mean, you're all around town. I guess it's really neat for us fans to see a lot of you Buckeyes come back, and so many are in coaching. I know you've helped out with coaching before, but even in the business world, Greg with medical world. I mean, it's really neat to see.
Yeah, I think it didn't happen overnight. We started as a real estate company, just buying apartments, with friends and family, and gradually grew. I think a lot of kids that come out of college that I've talked to, maybe the last 5 or 10 years, they want to do it right away. They want to be a developer. We didn't develop real estate until we were 10 plus years into our real estate career. We had just bought other people's property
Sure.
and managed it, and kind of made some mistakes, and you learn from them. But build our business, over the last 30 plus years. And so we're really proud of the projects that we've done here locally, and continue to grow. And there's always challenges. Interest rates have been up the last couple of years. I tell people it's always something. It's never exactly easy. And there'll be something 5 years from now that we're going to have to figure out. So, but we just keep trying to do really good projects that people want to see in their neighborhoods and in their communities. And feel like we've done that with Bridge Park and Water Street over in Dayton, and a number of other projects that we're working on now. And I feel just so lucky that I found a business and something to do with the rest of my life that is so similar to some of the things that I had in football. It's very competitive. We have a team of people, at our company that are working on these projects together. You win some, you lose some, you learn from your mistakes, and you have sort of the joys of success. When you close a big deal, or you create a project and have a grand opening, or whatever it might be. So just really thankful that I've been able to find something that's been so gratifying for me.
Well, Bob, thanks so much for all your time today. It's been a real treat for me to get to go down memory lane with you a little bit on some of the highlights of your career and your time at Ohio State, but even hearing about everything you're into now. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Seth.
Hey, check out all the Buckeye Banters on the Buckeye Huddle Network, and stick around for Buckeye Huddle news and information as it comes on all social media platforms and where you find podcasts.